All right, this one is for the old heads who have been following my channel for a long time and are used to me just like turning on the camera and screaming without any editing and with my dog barking in the background. This video is for you because that's going to be the format this time. I'm sorry that I haven't been able to like put in time and effort into like properly editing my videos, but thank you all so much for supporting me and watching a lot of my newer content. I've been in the process of moving and we finally moved, so I'll finally be able to like dedicate more time and energy into making videos for you guys, which is going to be awesome because the DLC is right around the corner. I feel like I moved at the most opportune time. I was worried that it was going to land during June, but thankfully we're here, we're out here, and we're going to be doing our best. So I'm going to be talking about the butterfly crafting items and which child they represent, but it actually, this video got way more complex and a lot more hefty than I was thinking it was going to be. I thought it was just going to be like, this butterfly is Melina, this butterfly is Miquella, and this butterfly may or may not be Mesmer or Melina. Let's get into it. It actually got way more complicated. And a lot of that is because there's a lot of discourse around fragmented identity and whether or not one soul can fragment into multiple other characters. There's also a really great lore theory right now floating around, and I want to give a huge shout out to Tim Diggity. So go check out Tim's video on Is Miquella Melina, because I think it is really compelling, specifically in regard to the spirit calling bell and how Melina ended up with Torrent's ring. I'm going to explore another avenue that could be interpreted, but I am open to that being a thing. For those of you that are new to the Soulsborne series, it's actually not super uncommon for one character to be fragmented into multiple characters. Specifically in Dark Souls 1, we have Manus, who in Dark Souls 2, his soul gets fragmented into multiple souls, and all of them are women. All of them are women that end up becoming rulers or leaders, and it's really awesome to see, like, I don't know, I didn't used to like this idea of kind of like this cycle of reused characters. I used to hate that because I thought maybe it was lazy writing, but now that I understand that it's supposed to depict a cycle of like repeat errors or a cycle of suffering, I do understand that, and I appreciate it a lot more now, especially that Miyazaki has the support and the, you know, finances and like the team to amplify his vision. I think also getting George R.R. Martin on the writing has been like incredibly helpful. I just love the way that everything is manifested in Elden Ring. It's so wonderful, and I'm gonna get into all of that while we dive into this. But before I get into each individual child and some of the identity stuff that's going on in this game, and like who's the Gloam-Eyed Queen, who is Melina, who is Miquella, who is Saint Trina, I do need to break down some kind of like baseline lore that we've covered in other videos. For those of you that have seen my Elden John video, and for those of you that have seen any of my older videos, this is gonna be like old news to you, but for those of you that are new here and like have no clue who Elden John is, this is for you. I'm gonna go over this very quickly. So there is definitely like a vague timeline that we can break apart in Elden Ring based off of the sigils and how the depiction of the Elden Ring has changed over the course of history. I would say the biggest point or the biggest difference is that there used to be 4 equidistant rings, and the 4th most southern ring is then absorbed into the center to become what's called the Anchor Rune, which is then owned by Godric in the story, but it's kind of uncertain. It's kind of uncertain like how this changes anything. All we know is that there's just like a big disparity between the rune that is depicted in Farum Azula and then the rune that's depicted from the ancient Erdtree era onward into the fundamentalist era, which we know now. But we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to talk about everything that predates the Erdtree and Erdtree burials. I'm going to be talking about all of the magic that talks about like in an era before the Erdtree, or like, you know, magic that exists outside of the purview of the Erdtree. We're going to be talking about ancestral followers, we're going to be talking about deathrite birds, the Godskins, the Gloam-Eyed Queen. I need to set the foundations for everything so that way you guys know what I'm talking about, because there's a couple of folks who have rolled up into my streams and have had no idea who the fuck we're talking about. So let's get this established. So for those of you that are unfamiliar, there is a specific unique icon asset that is on the map call the Old Palace. I know that because of translation, this could also be translated into like Palace or Old Palace. I've seen like variants and interpretations or translations, but is like very similar to ancient Mesopotamia. I'll talk about that. We're going to talk about like the visual design and like visual inspiration for these areas. But pretty much there is like this ancient dynasty that used to exist. Tarnished Archaeologist also has a video on them. I want to amplify that and boost that as well. And I'm going to talk about some of Tarnished Archaeologist's findings in addition to my own during this section. So check out that video. I'm going to link it in the description below. But pretty much there is this ancient dynasty that used to exist, and a lot of different groups worship this entity, or like worship in the ruins of this group. And it's different than the Noxtella and Nokron. It's like different than the Eternal Cities. It's its own thing, and it predates the Eternal Cities by like several thousand years, based off of like the architecture, if we're just looking at like the historical allegories. So a lot of the architecture is based off of like ancient, it's based off of ancient Mesopotamian and like Babylonian architecture. So for example, we have Jordan that's being represented. We have the Tigris and the Euphrates that's being represented. I do think that the Ayensel River Well and the Shiofer River Well are like a multifaceted allegory. I think that they're both representative of the Tigris and the Euphrates, but I also think that they're representative of the Nordic river wells and Nordic mythology, and I'll talk about that too. But a lot of the architecture and like ruins are taken from like actual Babylonian ruins. So we have Jordan being represented here. We have the Black Obelisk that's being represented, although I talk about this in another video, but the reliefs that are like being depicted are different. So they fully like ripped this asset, like they scanned it and like put it in the game, but the thing that's different are these pieces right here. They changed the reliefs here, but everything from like here down is like the actual asset itself. There is cuneiform, which is like the ancient language that is depicted on this section. You can kind of see it right here. But yeah, there's cuneiform in the game. There is like ancient Hebrew in the game. There's like a bunch of different languages that are in the game. So it's really cool to see all of these like historical references, like kind of helping us get an idea of where things sit on a timeline. Because I do think that by utilizing these like ancient civilizations, we're able to kind of evoke this like feeling of, or like the developers are able to evoke this feeling of, this is very old. Like this is very old, and it's very clear that like based off of the materials that they used and based off of everything else that it's older than the Eternal Cities. So it's a cool way to allow history to inform your art and to like create a feeling without necessarily like explicitly stating in the lore anywhere that they're older than the Eternal Cities. It's just visually obvious that they're older than the Eternal Cities. So I think it's incredibly important to like break that down and differentiate them. The Eternal Cities also have a different icon on the map than these ruins. So these ruins are incredibly important because the ancestral followers like post up in these ruins, and so does Moog, and like a lot of the Mogwin Dynasty Omen that like follow him, they also post up in these ruins. So there's a bunch of different groups that are more modern that are trying to like embrace older practices, because these older practices embrace them and have room for them, whereas the Ur-Tree Fundamentalist Order doesn't. The Ur-Tree Fundamentalist Order doesn't allow them to exist how they want to because of that system of rules that have been put into place. And I think it has a lot to do with the Rune of Destined Death being sealed and with death being processed differently. So let me break this down really quick. The ancestral followers have a belief where they'll actually like do sacrificial rituals, and they'll kill people that don't experience what's called budding. Sorry, big Cooper snore. They'll kill individuals that aren't experiencing budding. So hold on, let me actually go over here. So this is a budding horn, and this is the ancestral spirit horn. It says this horn began to sprout on a beast that typically bears no horn. Perhaps it's a vestige of the primordial crucible. And then if you read the ancestral spirit, like the regal ancestral spirit horn, it says, a number of new growths bud from the antler-like horns of the fallen king, each glowing with light. Thus does new life grow from death, and from death one obtains power. So this is incredibly important. The antlers are like this petrified gray looking color, and then leaves are sprouting from this. And there's also like a really cool mechanic that the regal ancestral spirit has as like a boss mechanic. I know a lot of people will be over leveled or like over tuned when they encounter this boss sometimes, to the point where like they don't get to see this mechanic happen. I actually missed this mechanic the first time that I went through, but if you're fighting the regal ancestral spirit, it'll actually sacrifice all of the animals in the arena, because there's like spirit animals running around. It'll sacrifice all those animals and absorb it, and like when it absorbs those animals, it regens hit points. So it's really cool. There's like this idea of spirits being like absorbed into this like container, which is like the ancestral spirit, being shown in practice, being shown in the boss fight mechanic. Stutter, sorry. But yeah, so you can kind of see on the regal ancestral spirit boss, it's growing tree leaves. It's like the gray, like petrified remains growing new life, which is such a cool visual motif. I love to see it. But there's this like weird antler horn. It looks like moose antlers. And it says, in the ancestral spirit worshipping faith, these are considered envoys' wings, made to reap the lives of beings which experience no sprouting. So these were like part of the sacrificial ritual where they would sacrifice the beings with no horns. There's also the priestesses, the ancestral spirit priestesses, who like post up in the old palace ruins, and they're typically facing these like petrified trees, and they're singing to the trees, and they're holding up the, I think they're holding up a horn, or they're holding up like the infant head. But they're like praying, and they're usually surrounded by animals, usually rats or stags or whatever. The males will sometimes like stomp, and that's their like dance ritual thing that they do. But you can also find them, I think another really cool fun fact is you can also find them around the petrified trees that are in the consecrated snowfield. This was a really difficult picture for me to get because the blizzard makes it like incredibly hard to see, but you can see them worshiping the trees in this area as well. So it definitely seems like they'll be both topside and underside around the old palace ruins. You could find them in the labyrinth topside and Liurnia, kind of like kicking it around the Elden John statues. But you could also find them, you know, in the undercities doing the same thing. They just love to be around this idea of like sacrificial sprouting, growing trees out of the self, cultivating this like spiritual material into like a spirit tree. And I'm going to be using the term spirit tree from here on out. But this is really cool because it actually ties in with a real world myth in Nordic mythology that has to do with this big stag. I'm going to be using its English name because I'm really, really bad at a lot of these older names, but Oakthorny is this stag that eats the leaves off of the Yggdrasil, and there's a lot of poems about how there's like celestial dew or like these celestial waters that then come off of its horns. And I've seen it described in multiple different ways. I've seen it described as like it is coming from the elk itself, like it's coming off of the elk's horns itself. But I've also seen it described as like it is like catching the dew of like the fresh morning, like the sun is rising, and you know, like when you see dew on like grass in the morning, it's like that, and it's shedding off of the antlers of these like great stags and creating the river wells of the entire world. So the fact that we have like the Ainsel river well and the Siofra river well kind of like flowing through relates to this myth and relates to the ancestral spirit, which I think is really cool. So we have three different myths happening. We have Celtic myth with the naming conventions of Ainsel and Siofra. We have Nordic myth with the giant stags, and we have Babylonian myth with a lot of the oracle bubble boys. I'm gonna link a thread down below for those of you that are interested in those guys. Content creator LilChurchLore made a whole Twitter thread on like the lore and historical references regarding the bubble boys, I'm gonna call them that, in the Riverwell. There's a lot of like really cool myths regarding them, but that is like a whole ass other video that I can make, and I don't want to get into that right now. So I'm gonna link that in the description down below if you're interested. But yeah, so we have this era pre-Erd Tree burials, and so we have one way that death is processed is through this like death rite ritual. Another way that death is processed, and something else I also want to point out too, this is something that Vati actually pointed out to me, but the Great Horn ritual staff actually does look like deathrite bird wings. And even though it's saying that, or even though it says that, this is like obviously created from a horn, it says this is the item description, a distinctive horn. It does say that these are considered envoys' wings, and the deathrite birds, as well as the twin birds, are considered the envoys of death. The twin birds are the mother of the deathrite birds, and the twin birds are like quite fascinating. They're depicted all over Farum Azula, which Farum Azula is where we find this version of the Elden Ring. And Farum Azula is a giant floating mausoleum. Specifically, Tarnished archaeologists pointed out that this is inspired by the necropolis of Varna, which is like a very, very, very ancient necropolis. I want to say that one is about like 5000 BC. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Double check that, because I actually don't remember off the top of my head. But it's very, very ancient. So we have this whole visual, like, whoever is the art director of these games is fucking cracked. Point blank period. Like, they really nailed all of these like ancient older societies as like either like the advent of human language or pre-language. And like the way that death is processed in all of these is very like pagan. It's like very like associated with like this natural cycle of life and death. There's a lot of animal depiction. There's a lot of just like really awesome stuff that is cool and neat to consider. Oh, another little dealie. The spiral columns that I talked about in the DLC breakdown video, those also are from this area too. So it's cool that we're seeing, it's Jerusalem. It's cool that we're seeing like all of this architecture that is like referencing this particular area and like this era of history. I love it. It's cool. So anyway, after this, not after this era, I want to talk about the Gloam-Eyed Queen. That's right. So we talked about the deathrite birds. Deathrite birds were in charge of burning the dead before Erdtree burials were a thing. So in the time when there was no Erdtree, death was burned in ghost flame. Death birds were the keepers of that fire. And then the entities that were in charge of death indiscriminate, so like the death of gods, because gods were also mortal during this time. There was no immortal god. The Godskin nobles and the Godskin apostle and the Gloam-Eyed Queen were all in charge of dealing with the death of the gods. So we have the deathrite birds who are like just in charge of mortality, and then we have like these human entities that are in charge of death indiscriminate. So like, you are not above mortality, even if you're a god. It's death indiscriminate. Everybody deserves a chance. Like there needs to be cycles of life and death. And it's like a part of the natural cycle of everything. So something that I think is really important is the fact that like the deathrite birds are associated as a time before the Erdtree, and the nobles are the most ancient apostles who have assimilated in human physiology, not unlike the Crucible, the Erdtree in its primordial form. There is this idea of like a primordial Erdtree that's referenced throughout the game. Some people call it the Great Tree. Some people debate whether or not the Great Tree even existed. I'm definitely of the mindset that there is like a primordial version of the Erdtree, and I think that it changes to the Erdtree at some point in history, and I think that line exists right here. Maybe? I don't know. But I do think that the Crucible era is like incredibly important, and Godfrey's Crucible Knights cast this like sigil, and this is like considered the ancient Erdtree era, but like it's very clear that the anchor rune is active during this era, whereas in this one there is no anchor rune. It's like 4 equidistant circles. So it's very clear that there's like an obvious difference between these two eras. And I think that has a lot to do with death and death being sealed away, and I think it has a lot to do with the way that death is processed changing. And it's during this era that Godfrey and his rule then create these like big gladiatorial coliseums where people will like get together and they'll fight each other, and the people who die will get put into pots, and then the pots get put at the base of Erdtrees and then later minor Erdtrees, and it almost looks as if they're acting as like fertilizer. It's like mass Erdtree burials kind of on steroids. So that's like this whole era of death being processed, right? That whole era like was established with Godfrey. But that's like a whole other, once again, that's like a whole other video. I don't want to get like too distracted. Okay, now we've made it to Golden Order fundamentalism. This is when, Marika has dumped Godfrey and she gets together with, Radagon, and whether or not that he was like his own man or if he was always an aspect of Marika, that's up for debate, and I'm sure that we're going to get like a big reveal of that in the DLC. But when her and Radagon have children, they are considered to be born from one god, not born from a lord and a god, not born from two different gods, born from one god. And these kids often have curses associated with them. And if you read Miquella's like lore and Melina's lore, it says Miquella and Melina are both children of a single god. As such, they are both Empyreans, but suffered afflictions from birth. One was cursed with eternal childhood, where the other harbored rot within. And I feel like I'm gonna knock out Melina's butterfly because I feel like it's the most obvious and the easiest for me to like break down. Melina's butterfly not only resembles Melina in like color palette and concept, but it's actually referenced in the butterfly item description that it is associated with the goddess of rot herself, and that it's also referring to Aeonia, which is the name that refers to Scarlet Aeonia, which is Melina's massive bloom she released during her battle with Radon. In addition to all of this, all of the items that you can create with this butterfly item are all rot related, so like it's very obvious that this is about her. There's like no debate as to like who this is referencing. This is Melina, right? But then we have the nascent butterfly, and the nascent butterfly is like super interesting because Miquella's lore is all over the place. So very simple visual reference is that the nascent butterfly is like in reference to Miquella's eternal youth, but also Miquella's cocoon. The description says an arcane butterfly with translucent wings, material used for crafting items. Exceedingly rare to find, this butterfly appears as if it's emerged from its cocoon for its entire life. As if it's just emerged from its cocoon for its entire life. Sorry. So it's kind of saying it's like a premature, like eternal youth butterfly. It's like translucent, its wings aren't fully developed yet, is kind of what it's trying to get at. And then also this like arcane magic is very important. A lot of the bubble magic and a lot of the Babylonian inspired magic is intelligence arcane or just intelligence. So it's kind of like associated with those practices. But it's really cool because Miquella's butterfly's wings can create the dappled cure meat or the dappled white cure meat, which is very similar to in like function and in visual design, the ancestral following horns, which help with like our immunity stat, our robustness stat, our focus stat. So it is like this idea of like a cure or like older medicine that like helps us increase our like robustness and like our immunities. And it's really cool because like Miquella's whole story is about finding a cure for their siblings. And I want to talk about that. And I think that it's like such a beautiful story, but it also made me wonder about Tim Diggity's video because we were talking about whether or not Tim Diggity is Melina? Whether or not Miquella is Melina, or Miquella is the Gloam-Eyed Queen, or Melina is the Gloam-Eyed Queen, or who is Saint Trina. Like, I want to break this down a little bit because I think it's really important, but hold on to this ancestral follower relation because it is important to this. So we're going to get into Miquella's history. So Miquella is the child of Radagon and Marika, and Miquella was born during this era of the Erdtree. I want to make it very clear, the Gloam-Eyed Queen is over here. She's back over here. She's old. She's older. And another thing too that I want to point out, the Gloam-Eyed Queen and Queen Marika's runes are twin runes. They're like the same, but they're inverted, right? So we have the rune of dust and death, and we have the rune of abundance, or what I like to call like the rune of life, or like birth. It's like flowing life, newborn life. So we have like this cycle of life and death that mirror each other. I definitely think that the Gloam-Eyed Queen was Queen Marika's twin because of this, but she could be related to Queen Marika in another way that we don't know. Or like I said before, there is also like a popular theory that the Gloam-Eyed Queen is an aspect of Queen Marika's self, and that she was both life and death, but she chose to seal away a part of herself. I personally like to see the Gloam-Eyed Queen as like a completely separate entity, although I would be open to Marika being both and sealing away that part of her. I'm like open to anything at this point, but I do think that given Mohg and Morgott having twin runes and being two separate individuals, I'm just kind of going off of that logic that that is the Gloam-Eyed Queen and Queen Marika being separate individuals with opposite concepts. Malekith also is the one who sealed away the Gloam-Eyed Queen, and all of the Gloam-Eyed Queen related stuff, the Destined Death stuff, happens to exist on Farum Azula, right? With the twin death birds and with Malekith Serena being in that room and like all that shit. So I think that this giant floating mausoleum that was kind of like at the center of the primordial Erd tree was the Gloam-Eyed Queen's domain. It just makes sense thematically because it's all death related. Okay, moving on from that, let's talk about Miquella again. So Miquella was the child of Marika and Radagon, and Miquella had a problem with a couple things. So Miquella was like faithful to Golden Order fundamentalism, which is what Radagon championed. Radagon was all about Golden Order fundamentalism. And Miquella created a gift for his dad, and it was called the Rings of Light. And there's an incantation that you can read. It says, produces 3 rings of light and fires them forward. It was a gift from young Miquella to his father Radagon. And Radagon responded with a gift with a gift of gratitude to the young Miquella from his father Radagon. Produces a golden ring of light and fires it across a wide area. Charges enhance range. And yet, the young Miquella abandoned fundamentalism, for it could do nothing to treat Melina's accursed rot. This is the beginning of unalloyed gold. So it seems like there was some kind of, I don't know if I'm reading into this too much, but it seems like this exchange may have triggered Miquella to then pursue creating the Halig tree and moving away from fundamentalism. It seems like he was beseeching, like a young Miquella was beseeching Radagon to potentially cure Melina's rot affliction, and it just seemed like fundamentalism couldn't do anything for her, and so then Miquella chose to choose a different path. And Miquella's path is very interesting because Miquella gets into some ancestral follower stuff, Miquella gets into some Noxtella stuff, Miquella gets into like all different aspects of belief in order to try to like find a cure. And this is like supported by a couple things. It also seems too that like Miquella is concerned over the death of Godwyn the Golden, because Godwyn didn't die a true death. Godwyn's soul was destroyed, but his body physically lives and grows forever. So it seems like Miquella is like concerned about Godwyn's circumstances. It just seems like Miquella is plagued with like the circumstances of his siblings and doesn't know how to like reconcile that within Golden Order fundamentalism, which makes sense because there's like a lot of other NPCs that also struggle to reconcile this. Goldmask, all of Goldmask's lore regarding Litany of Proper Death and like the Golden Order hunters is super fascinating and plays into all of this. I'm not going to get into that though. I went into that in another video I can link below, but yeah, it just seems like a lot of people are kind of like looking at Golden Order fundamentalism and being like, what the fuck, man? Like, why isn't this, where are all these curses coming from? Why is rot not like creating new life? Like, why is rot stagnating? Why are those who live in death not passing on? Like, what is going on here? And it seems like there's a lot of confusion and a lot of like divergence in philosophy to try to understand what's going on. So anyway, that being said, it seems like Miquella decided to take a different route, and one of the ways that Miquella decided to go was to look at Noxtella. And there's like a couple of lore beats that I think get lost really easily, but one of them is that there's the Castle Sol Knights who guard the walking mausoleums. If you go to Castle Sol and you beat Commander Null and you talk to the ghost that is at the edge of, I don't know if I have a picture of it. I don't. There's a ghost at the end of Castle Sol that attributes Miquella to their whole organization. So he's like lamenting to Miquella because these are like banished knights that don't have fealty to anybody, and it seems like they wanted to swear fealty to the Halig tree. But Miquella said, in order for you to gain access to the Halig tree, you need to fix my comrade. You need to like put the soul or like duplicate the soul of my comrade during the eclipse. And it's a little vague as to like what that means or who the comrade is, but a lot of people theorize that Godwyn is the one who we're referring to, given a lot of the lore regarding Godwyn being like the soulless demigod, and given the lore regarding the golden epitaph and like Miquella lamenting about Godwyn. I think that that is like a good like theory, you know. But the walking mausoleums utilize architecture and technology from Noxtella, and like it's very clear that like Noxtella probably existed around like here on the timeline. Miquella's born over here, so it's very clear that like Miquella is like getting technology from like an older civilization to do these like weird eclipse dark moon type rituals. Interesting. And then we also see Miquella like divests his flesh and becomes a tree. And this is like explicitly said by Gideon. I know that some people theorized that this isn't Miquella. This is Miquella. And it says, so the Halig tree, now but a husk, I heard speculation that Miquella embedded himself in the Halig tree, but before he could finish, someone cut the tree open and absconded with his infant form. Indeed, it seems those words held weight. How vexing. So Gideon tells us this. And then I made this like visual a long time ago on Twitter, but you can see that this is like Miquella's body, and then there's like, you can kind of, I outlined like where his rib cage is and like where the arm is, but there's also this big lump in like the stomach area that looks like a womb, and there's like a big pelvis bone that this cocoon sits on. So I definitely think that the cocoon and this like pelvis sat at this point in the tree, and I do think that there was like a transference happening. I think that the body that was inside of the cocoon was being absorbed and like slowly turning into the tree, and then Moog like ripped it out. And this is also supported too, in addition to like Gideon's dialogue, by the fact that like if you look at this arm right here, it's kind of like warped and weird. It's really long and kind of like twisty and bizarre, but it resolves and kind of like forms into a hand that is grasping this like rock. And at the very base of it, we see Melina, who is dreaming. She's like in a slumber, and she talks about how she's waiting for him to return. I kind of wonder if during her dream that she was trying to commune with Saint Trina, which is like the feminine aspect of Miquella, which is supported by like the lilies and with Fervor's cookbook and like the lore regarding that. It's not just cut content, by the way. I know there's a lot of people that are like, cut content doesn't count, but like the Fervor's cookbook uses like Miquella lilies and like Miquella items to create Saint Trina stuff, or vice versa. And the Fervor's cookbook is about Saint Trina. It's a whole thing. Don't worry about it. Whatever. So Melina is like holding hands with this big tree entity, and she's like sleeping. So it's very clear there's like this rebus multi-gendered aspect to Miquella. It looks like there was the transference of energy kind of emulates like a pregnancy in some ways, with the way that the cocoon would have sat, I feel. And then I think also too with like the medieval imagery of like the rebus, and am I saying that right? I feel like I'm saying it too close to like Reba or something. I don't know. But yeah, I feel that like Miquella is like engaging in this like ritual where they're feeding their sacramental blood to this tree to grow a tree. And I think that this is where we get a little bit of tie-in addition to like the immunity ancestral follower shit. I think that we're getting a little bit of tie-in to this idea of like an ancient civilization that liked to grow trees. And I think that the Erd tree may have been grown by a previous entity that predated Queen Marika, and I think it was this guy. I'm pretty sure it was this guy. this is the man that the primordial Erd tree may have grown from or may be involved with, I don't know. Or he just knew some kind of like shit about growing trees that I think is like incredibly important to a lot of like groups that are trying to grow their own civilizations or grow their own trees. But I think that Miquella is one of them. And I definitely think that a lot of those social practices and the stuff that Miquella is drawing from predate fundamentalist era stuff. So Miquella is like pulling all these ancient things from like death rituals and like the Gloam-Eyed Queen and Noxtella and all this other stuff. So does that mean I think that Miquella is the Gloam-Eyed Queen? There's like a couple of damning things. It definitely seems like Miquella came in possession of some of the Gloam-Eyed Queen stuff, like the Spirit Calling Bell might be associated with her or might be associated with the Snowy Crone and Spirit Calling and like the Royal Revenants. There's a lot of overlap there. It's very interesting that Melina at the beginning of our journey gives us Torrent when Torrent was Miquella's. So there's some like overlap with maybe how did Melina know Miquella? Is Melina Miquella? Is Miquella the Gloam-Eyed Queen? Like, what is going on? Like I said before, Manus in Dark Souls 1 was like, so say if the Gloam-Eyed Queen was fragmented, there could be a story beat opportunity for her to be fragmented into like multiple different kids. She could be fragmented into Melina, Miquella, Melania. Maybe like these are all aspects of her. Maybe rot and decay, but then also death, and then also sleep are all different parts of death. Maybe they're like loosely associated. Maybe these are all separate outer gods that are associated with death. I'm like totally open to that, but I don't know, I just feel like saying that so many of the characters in the game are each other, I don't know. Maybe it can lend itself to it being kind of like interesting about like internal conflict or something, but at the same time it kind of seems like it is getting a little bit tangled and messy with a lot of the speculation. But that could just be me. I don't know. Whatever. Let's talk about Melina, because I feel like that is gonna kind of tie up all the loose ends that I think some people might have. So, and this is like one of the bigger things that I've noticed in my community or people that are newer to my channel that come into the streams. And when I kind of loosely say Melina is the Gloam-Eyed Queen, people don't know what I'm talking about. So I'm gonna break this down really quick, because I don't think a lot of people have actually seen the Frenzied Flame ending or anything like that. But at the very end of the Frenzied Flame ending, we destroy the Erd tree and it like breaks the cycle, right? We don't iterate on the cycle, it's fully over and done. And after we do that, Melina is able to like open up her eye and she says, I'm gonna deliver you what is yours, destined death. And that ties into the concept of destined death, which was what the Gloam-Eyed Queen ruled over. She was like in charge of destroying the gods. She was in charge of death indiscriminate. And Melina has a lot of dialogue about that. And the dialogue around her birth is also quite weird. And I'm going to talk about that too. So let's break down some of her dialogue. So she says first that she is searching for her purpose given to her by her mother inside the Erd tree long ago, for the reason that she yet lives burned and bodiless. So like, one, how could you be living burned and bodiless? Why does she have amnesia about that? Like, what is going on about that? It's also bizarre too that like her movement is stagnated. Like she's only able to go to certain areas and we have to take her to the Erd tree. So that's like an important plot point. There's also a weird room in the Forbidden Lands that looks like it was originally like a room where she was kept. Do I have a picture of that? Maybe I don't. But there's a room. Oh yeah, I do. There's a room on the elevator. If you go up towards the Forbidden Lands, there's like a jump off point and it's like a secret room. And this room has a door that has bars and like a jail cell happening. And then there's a royal official who is sitting in a chair outside of this room. And this is where you actually get Melina's Blade of Calling. So there's a weird prison that is in this elevator. And a lot of people didn't realize that it's like a jail cell. But yeah, there's bars on the door and there's an official that's watching it, that's sitting outside of it. So that's weird. Another thing that's weird regarding her birth, or regarding like her origin and where she was kept, is that she seems to have a really confused idea about what motherhood is about. She doesn't really understand the circumstances of her birth, but she also doesn't understand what being born of a mother means. When you tell Bach that he's beautiful, he starts crying, and she says, "I think Bach misses his mother. Does being born of a mother mean one behaves in such a manner?" So it's kind of weird that she has this like relationship with her mother, but she doesn't really know how she came about. She, talked to her mother long ago inside of the Erd tree, but she doesn't really have like a maternal relationship with Queen Marika, and this aspect of like her identity and the circumstances of her birth are just like so bizarre. Like, was she born a preteen? How old is she? Is she 15? Is she like an infant? What's going on? I don't know what her deal is. Was she the result of an Erd tree birth that went wrong? Is she just a remembrance? Like, what is she? She doesn't have a physical body, so I was a little bit confused. But then she talks about how she's long observed the lands between. This world is in dire need of repair, and death indiscriminate. Are you prepared to commit a cardinal sin? That's before we like take her to the Forbidden Lands to burn her. So she says she's going to deliver us what is ours, destined death. She has an eye that is like a purplish color, and a lot of people attribute this to being like dusk eye or Gloam-Eyed, like when the sun kind of sets below everything and the sky turns like that dark indigo color. Also, for those of you that were wondering, there's that entity called the Dusk-Eyed Queen, and there's another entity called the Gloam-Eyed Queen. I had Loki translate them. They are the same entity. That was a localization error, so they are the same. So it's good to know. Another little like cool fun fact about Melina is that her tattoo resembles a bird's foot. It has 3 claws, and then it also has the dew claw that is right here. So there's 4 claws. I know a lot of people were thinking it's 3-finger inspired, but it's actually like more avian inspired, which is a little neat like wink and a nod to the Deathrite birds and some of the like bird related imagery regarding death. So I kind of love that. For those of you that are wondering, why was her eye closed? What does her eye open mean? So eyes symbolically in Soulsborne lore have to do with like truth or cosmic knowledge or divine knowledge that's otherwise like obscured or revealed. So I think that like her eye closed indicates like a form of amnesia, but her eye open indicates a form of awakening or insight or perception. I think that that's what that is about. I know that Mesmer also has a closed eye, so I kind of wonder if there's some people that speculate there's a relationship between Melina and Mesmer. I'd be curious about that because, there's this idea of kindling or burning. She acts as kindling for us, but she doesn't really have an affinity with fire outside of that. Like, she doesn't use fire attacks when we help her, or when we summon her to help us fight Morgott. She uses like holy attacks. So it's kind of interesting. She doesn't have this affinity with fire outside of being burned, and any maiden can be burned. It's not exclusive to her. So I find that interesting. But also, there's like this relationship with fire that Mesmer has, but he burns people. Like he's on the flip side of it. So like she's burning herself for sacrifice. He has an affinity with fire because he's like, there's a lot of theories, and I agree with this, that he may have like helped sealing away the giants, or that he may have been, his like era may have been associated with sealing. I don't know. This is all speculation, but it seems like maybe he was instrumental in the giant wars. We'll see. This is all like, he could have nothing to do with the giant wars, but it's just interesting that like we have this imagery with like the fire giants and flame and blood being a symbol of punishment, and then these boys, being like humans that were gathered together and are being burned like kindling, kind of. So it seems like almost like she was the burned and he is the burner. I don't know, but I don't know. I think that the scorched butterfly itself, the fact that it serves as kindling for a number of items, like the function that we use the butterfly in does does attribute itself more to Melina than Mesmer, but I do think that the affinity with fire is more Mesmer. So I'm curious to see if they're tied together at all. This is kind of a reach, but I thought it was kind of like a cute detail. Somebody pointed out that the veins that are on this butterfly's wings kind of look like the top of the Erd tree, and it kind of could resemble like the Erd tree burning, or like, you know, the first cardinal sin, maybe associated with Mesmer potentially being the first one who burned the Erd tree or attempted to burn the Erd tree. But yeah, I'd love to see more on that in the DLC. I think that that'll come to light soon, in June. It'll be sooner than we know. Oh, another little side note that I wanted to touch on that I thought was really cool. So Miyazaki loves to like iterate on previous NPCs, like Big Hat Logan or like Yuria the Witch from Demon Souls, and like all the different witch iterations throughout all the Dark Souls games. He loves to take like NPC ideas and kind of like reiterate them or reformat them or rework them in a way that supports his like new story a little bit better, which I love that though. It's like a really clever way to reuse assets. So that way you're not like starting from ground one with every single thing that you do. And it allows you to make your next creation more robust and like to add more to it. Iterative work is awesome. And I don't want to downplay that. I don't want to make it seem like this is lazy, because I don't think that Elden Ring was like the product of laziness. I think it was the product of being able to like revise and iterate in a way to create this massive experience. But I do think that Melina and like this whole Dust and Death theme and Black Flame and Ash and Death and like the rejection of life, or like a false life cycle, does kind of like resemble Black Flame Freed's character design. The fact that she has like violet eyes, the fact that she's like rejecting flame, and that she's like representative of Black Flame. Her character design just reminds me so much of Melina in a lot of ways. I think it's like the color palette and like the cloak and the violet eyes and the kind of like scarred face, or like the cloak, like, you know, I feel like there's a lot of inspiration being pulled from her, which I love to see. So yeah, that is the breakdown that I have of these three kids. I'm like curious to see in the end who is who, what is what, you know, whose identity is which. I'm like, I know that this is left ambiguous to encourage the drama. Like, I know Miyazaki's out there, because like for those of you that don't know, Miyazaki's the most fucking dramatic developer. Like, he loves to start shit. So for Dark Souls 1, he had the pendant item, and he kept like hinting that like, oh, if you start with the pendant, something interesting will happen. And then it turns out that like nothing, there's nothing. Hold on, wait, let me see if I can find that interview. That one was like, that's my favorite fucking thing. Upon beginning a new Dark Souls game, you're offered the chance to pick a starting gift to help you on your travels. These range from very useful, like a master key that can unlock any door, to forgettable, like 10 firebombs. The most mysterious item was the pendant. In the in-game description it read, "Trinket, no effect, but fond memories can comfort travelers." Upon Dark Souls' release, game director Miyazaki said in Famitsu that he'd pick the pendant or nothing. For the last 13 months, fans have clamored to find out what hidden purpose it had. The Dark Souls wiki devoted 1,600 words to speculating as to its true effect. Only now has Miyazaki addressed this most mysterious of items. "When it comes to the pendant, I actually had a bit of an intention to play a prank," he said. "That's right, when I said it had no effect, what that meant was, no, seriously, it has no effect." Given how insanely obscure Dark Souls' dense systems are, Miyazaki knew fans would go crazy figuring it out, so the whole thing was just a giant red herring to keep people guessing. Well played, Miyazaki-san. Well played. And I think that kind of like sums up Miyazaki's design philosophy in a lot of ways. I do think that keeping story elements dramatic, or keeping phrases a little bit vague, or, you know, some of the kanji that's being used to describe some of these things is quite archaic or flowery or a little strange, even in Japanese, I know. So like the word crucible can be interpreted in English so many different ways, but in Japanese it's only interpreted one way, and there's a lot of like localization efforts to try to like discern the meaning behind particular NPCs and concepts and items. And so it's really interesting that we see, you know, how community driven these games are, because since its inception, Demon's Souls was like so esoteric and like none of the menus made any sense. So it really allowed the community to come together and try to like decipher everything. And I love that about the lore. That's why I love the lore, is because it's community driven too. And I think writing these like vague characters, or writing scenarios in which one character can be another character, or that there's a spirit self and a physical self, I think that it lends itself to the drama, and I love that. And that's why I want to encourage y'all to check out Tim Diggity's video on Is Melina Miquella, because I think it's compelling. Even though I'm not like fully sold on it, I think it's compelling, and I think that y'all should absorb all the weird ass theories while we still can, because this is the most like beautiful time for Soulsborne lore. It's like everybody can be correct and wrong, and we're all just like having a good time throwing spaghetti at the wall trying to figure out what the fuck is going on. So yes, thank you. This video was like super fucking long, but I hope that y'all have fun. And I'm gonna be creating like, I'm gonna be doing a ton of content. Obviously, I'm going to be streaming my playthrough of the DLC, completely like first time, no knowledge. We're going to be like hitting every single wall. We're going to be looking for all the mysteries. It's going to be fantastic. So make sure to tune in for that. I'll be sure to play alongside you guys. And then I'm also going to do like a couple of just fun videos, kind of like a, you know, like maybe like a breakdown of things that I'm most looking forward to for the DLC. Like I want to talk about the Eokite, I want to talk about the Briars and the Bloodstar, I want to talk about all that stuff. So yeah, I think that we're gonna be in for a treat with the DLC, and I'm quite excited. So yeah, thank you so much. Bye, 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 bye.